Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another West Bank Financials episode. Today, we are joined by Tallulah Le Merle. She's a professional in the investing and artificial intelligence space, which is pretty interesting because we haven't really delved into those industries too much yet. But I guess to start off, Ms. Le Merle, could you please tell us a little bit about your experience in, I see, AI and investing space and how you've gotten to this point?
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to delve into this topic for all of your student audience who's maybe interested in AI and art and the future of this technology. So, my background, I have spent well, I grew up in the States, but I actually went to the UK for university. Most of my family's British and French originally. So I did my undergraduate at Oxford. I studied geography and geopolitics specifically, which is very different from then what my career consisted of. Um, and then straight out of university, I went into consulting. So the majority of the first 7, 8 years of my career was as a management consultant. And I was working with big corporates on data and digital transformation topics. So there was kind of AI strategy in there, but at the time, I mean, this is like a decade ago, it was more machine learning and big data. So like AI has people have probably felt that like it's really exploded onto the scene in the past couple of years. So back when I was a consultant, it looked very different, but still that's where I started. So I was working with large corporates across all industries like pharma, healthcare, financial services, oil and gas, you name it. And then I left the firm because I kind of felt like I don't want to I mean, I loved consulting, but I wanted to really go into the heart of the ecosystem and be kind of more in the build side of the equation. So I went independent with the consulting work I was doing and started working with AI scale ups and growth companies, advising them and then starting to take fractional COO roles. So basically, what that translates into is often if you hear of someone starting a startup, they usually have a CEO and a CTO early on. But then as they get to scale up phase where they're having, getting a lot of investment from investors and really starting to grow, they need to operationally enhance their systems and structures and internal processes and all these sorts of things. So I'd help with that, which is really interesting. And as a result, got even deeper into the heart of the AI world, moved back to Silicon Valley Bay Area after 12 years in UK and France. And then about a year ago, took this hat as a partner in Fifth Era. And Fifth Era is basically a investment management firm that invests in exponential technologies. So basically, the term Fifth Era, this might be interesting to people. If you've studied the kind of eras of human evolution, you know we were hunter gatherers, then we were agrarians, where 90% of us were farmers. Then we were industrialists, where you have the rise of mass manufacturing and working in factories and the 9 to 5 Fordian model of work. And then the fourth era is this information era we've been in, where we all work 50% of the population works in services. We're on screens all day. We're connected via the internet. We live in this digital realm. So that's a fourth era, but we say we're moving into now a fifth, which will be underpinned by things like AI and blockchain and crypto digital assets. And it will be almost, yeah, completely new era of human evolution and interaction and what work means. So we invest in all the technologies that will be part of that fifth era. I lead our AI strategy, which I can talk more about. Um, but yeah, it's kind of the culmination of that decade of experience. And then the last thing I'll say, just as an introduction, is I'm really passionate and care deeply about the humanity side of the technology equation. So often when it comes to technology, people are, always speaking about, yeah, the technical sides of it, the engineering, the build, right? And obviously, I've spent my career mostly on that side of the equation, but I consider myself a humanist in that I'm really obsessed with human psychology, behavior relating. I've trained in many of those topics and studied them alongside my career over time. So I talk a lot about that, the humanity sides of the equation, ethical AI, governance of AI, and making sure this technology is built in a way that's going to be good for all of us and for human flourishing in the future.
Wow, okay, so pretty illustrious career, a lot of different roles, and it's pretty interesting. And I definitely resonate with what you said about being more on the human side. I mean, me personally, I'm not the most technical when it comes to this AI, so I can definitely appreciate that. But yeah, I guess the first question I have is, I mean, it kind of says in the name, as you mentioned, like blockchain. So I'm assuming you guys function in DeFi and AI. I was just wondering what like exciting like crossovers you've seen between artificial intelligence and decentralized finance.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I mentioned we invest in many exponential tech areas, but the original one we started with over a decade ago was blockchain and crypto. So we were very early into that space as a firm, and we've had 8 investment vehicles to date, giving us access to that world. We're investors in over 80 unicorns in blockchain, crypto, et cetera. So it's been a great strategy, which again, I haven't mentioned what our strategy is, but we do absolutely invest in that space. And then I lead our AI efforts. But I do think there'll be a number of areas where we're already seeing really interesting crossover. I mean, aside from crypto and tokens and, the use cases that sit on top of blockchain, blockchain as a technology provides lots of interesting opportunities when it comes to AI. Obviously, it's like a decentralized peer-to-peer encrypted layer that can do all sorts of things, but including storing data in a private kind of secure way. So one of the issues we have right now with AI is that people are worried about using, say, ChatGPT, because that's an open platform. So anything you put in there, it's the same as like doing a simple Google search, right? Like it's not secure where you're putting your data. So there's a large conversation about data privacy and the creation of private data wallets, for example, where if you're using blockchain to do that, I can upload and store all my personal data in the blockchain that gets encrypted then into numbers and letters. So it's hard to kind of, even if you could hack it, it's hard to, you know, it's secure. And I can then, I have agency over then who gets access to that and who plugs into it eventually, whether it's agents that I'm, artificial intelligence agents that I'm using in the future, et cetera. So that's one cool one. And then the other, just in simple terms, is if you talk about agentic AI, so Google just came out with the first AI native mobile device recently, Pixel 10. I don't know if people have seen it. Right now, all of our devices are internet first, right? So we use apps, we go on there and we use the internet ourselves. Agent first devices means that we'll basically interact with an AI agent that will then use the internet on our behalf or do things on our behalf, right? So in a future, if you fast forward into the future where I need to book a flight to Taiwan, I will talk to my agent, say, hey, I need to book that flight for in a month's time to Taiwan. My agent will then go on the, airline website, interact with an airline agent to book the flight. They'll be communicating in native language, but they'll also have to transact in a native currency, which is where crypto comes in. Because, it will be very unwieldy for those agents to be going in and accessing bank accounts and transferring money using, so something that's a native currency that can real time be transacted without me needing to go in and verify things or a third party bank, et cetera. That's another really interesting crossover space. We're not there yet, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it's very cool. I've always been curious about, I guess, how the two are related because they've both kind of been like, I mean, pretty big buzzwords for the past few years. Everyone's always talking about like AI and DeFi.
Right.
But I guess like related to that, I was wondering like a lot of this like DeFi and AI stuff, it's not really like generally like learned in schools. I was wondering if like most of the stuff that you learned about was it from I guess like personal experience like outside of education and the school system, or was it maybe in like university or
Yeah. Well, it opens up a whole broader conversation as well about education and the role of education in this fifth era of humanity that we're moving into. Because you're right, like if the way we work, interact, do most things will be underpinned by these technologies, people have to learn how to use them. And even in school, it's not like, I mean, now you kind of have like computer classes maybe but they tend to be pretty basic unless you're at a really cool institution that's digging into that. I would say, yeah, the AI, I mean, as I told you, I studied geography and geopolitics. That's a very far cry from a lot of the things we're talking about on this call. I was immersed in environmental studies and geomorphology and things like this. So it definitely started when I entered into my career as a consultant because I really gravitated towards, well, actually, that's not true. It didn't start there. Even in high school and things, I was exposed. I grew up in Silicon Valley Bay Area. I was exposed to a lot of these topics. Conrad, you and I met at the Keiretsu Expo. Even as a teenager in high school, I was interning and volunteering like you did with Keiretsu and running mics for the pitches that the startups were doing, right? So again, back then it wasn't AI or DeFi in the way we know it today, but it was definitely innovation, cutting edge tech, teams trying to build things. And then while I was at Oxford, I helped run Oxford Entrepreneurs, which is one of the largest entrepreneurial student run entrepreneurial organizations in the world with over 10,000 members, at least at the time that I was there. And I organized an Oxford Comes to Silicon Valley trip where we were meeting with all the big tech companies at the time. And we hosted big conferences each year with around 500 people, bringing all the tech leaders to speak. So yeah, I was exposed to it, I guess, all the way through. But my real content knowledge in the subject as like becoming more of an expert myself, I guess I'd say, started when I formally moved into the world of work and I was helping clients on those points.
So you're pretty much able to build like that rudimentary knowledge through like you mentioned the K-Retsu events, and then really focus more on the nitty gritty and the details once
Yeah.
you start your professional career. I guess related to that note, like how would you what would you tell students nowadays that maybe don't know too much about this space, how they should get into it? Because I know it's kind of hard to learn directly from school, because I know the public school system, at least from my experience, isn't always the strongest supporter of artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and that was this broader point about education. Right now, there's been an explosion of usage. Like I'm sure most of the people listening to this are using AI or using ChatGPT, and the usage has skyrocketed faster than, I don't want to say regulation of it, but like, it's not like the schools have provided standards or best practices in terms of how the students or teachers should be adopting and using AI in classroom settings. So, there's all these concerns about plagiarism or cheating and all these things. But at the same time, I see a big opportunity here because education has been the same model for centuries. And most of it, and again, this is not true if you go to a really wonderful school. Of course, there's many institutions that don't do it this way. But for the vast majority, it's kind of a teacher reciting knowledge to a student. They then take notes and kind of recite it back or write it back those answers to a test, and that's how you get an A. And so it's not actually, first of all, it's not rooted in the science and psychology of how we learn. Um, that's based on a passive listening model, which like I took French for many years at school. And my speaking's okay, but it's not great because we don't learn that way versus like, you get immersed for a few months in a country and you pick something up much faster because that we learn by doing, not by listening. I will get to your answer in a second. I just wanted to do this like caveat about AI and education. But it also is like, yeah, very passive, very, there's no real engagement and it rewards having knowledge versus applying the knowledge. It's like just have the knowledge and recite it back and you'll get an A versus like, how are you actually going to apply this? What do you do with it in your day-to-day life? So where I feel very optimistic about AI is that yes, it's sort of disruptive because now students are like, look, I can put the lecture, the syllabus, or the curriculum through ChatGPT and it's going to tell me it in a way that's like bite size or tailored to me. Like I can tell it to give me the information any way I want. It can gamify it, change the tone, make it funnier, make it more whatever, however I like to learn. And I'll learn it much better that way. So now the question is like, what happens when you come into the classroom? And I think there's a huge opportunity that classrooms become more about project-based learning, like applying the knowledge. Like, okay, you've all gone away and your homework was to learn the information. Now we're going to build a business based on this topic, or we're going to like do a hands-on project together, or we're going to debate each other and discuss what was your viewpoint based on what you heard, what was yours, someone in another part of the world in a very different circumstance, what might they think about this? And so in a way it's sort of, yeah, I think there's an opportunity to add that rigor into education system. Anyway, your question was like, how can students engage with it? Part of my point was I think they already are. And I think just getting curious about some of these tools and understanding them is a great way to start. Obviously, we were talking about LLMs, like the foundation models like ChatGPT or Gemini or Perplexity, whatever your favorite is. There's a ton of applications now to do any number of things. Like if you love content creation and media generation or make it, there's really cool creative and individual use cases of AI for that. There's ones for different industry contexts. There's ones that will teach you how to code. I mean, you can basically like you don't have to be highly technical and a coder yourself to now whip up a website on something or whip up a so just engaging with them more is a good starting point. And then yeah, as I say, like if there's a specific thing you really enjoy or would love to build or would love to learn more about, diving into the intersection of AI with that space. Or if you want to be a doctor, like looking at how AI is impacting the medical field. If you want to be a lawyer, looking at AI in legal, which is a huge space. If you want to go into manufacturing and supply chain, whatever you like, AI is I'd say disrupting for the it's changing whatever field you're interested in. So figure that out and learn about it because that makes you really valuable resource when it comes to looking for jobs and things like this.
Yeah, and on the note of, I guess, like careers, I wanted to ask, I know there's like a lot of FUD about like AI replacing people's jobs and people being unemployed because of AI. I wanted to ask what you thought about that personally.
My thought about that is that yes, AI is massively impacting the job space, but the only thing people focus on is the jobs that it will take or augment. And here are some of the stats. So, like the World Economic Forum says 90-ish million jobs will be impacted by 2030 or will kind of become obsolete. But they also project around 160, 70 million jobs will be created in the same time frame, which is only in the next 5 years. So it's like I give the example of the internet, right? The internet for sure when it came out replaced and made obsolete a ton of jobs. But now it's created entire industries. Look at social media marketing, social media influence, social media like influencer, like there's entire careers. That's a huge industry. E-commerce, selling things online, having entire storefronts online, an entire people's entire jobs are now in that space. So it's like more industries will be created. Well, historically have been created by these disruptive technologies than ever go away. And the other thing people don't mention is that this will actually be a relatively gradual evolution. Like there will be time. People always underestimate inertia. They're like, this is scaling at a much faster pace than we've ever experienced with any technology. But Goldman Sachs came out with a report estimating that the peak unemployment effect will only be 0.5 points, which pretty much equates to a relatively gradual change over time. Like for context, the 2011 economic recession was 5 points. COVID was 11 because obviously it's like overnight people were getting laid off or furloughed or what have you. So 0.5 points by contrast is relatively gradual. And for the most part, if you look at the types of jobs that it takes, it's like manual data entry and processing or kind of, yeah, physical work, cumbersome, slow workflows and processes in the short term with where we are right now in AI. And I would honestly argue, like, kind of good riddance to those roles. I honestly think, like, I don't mean to be glib about it because there are real risks about the job transition, but like, did any people listening to this want to like do data entry or like period end reporting in a finance function in a big company when they were kids? Like, when the kindergarten teacher's like, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't think so. So honestly, there's a lot of work we do today that doesn't really dignify the human experience. Like we're basically like, do this. Thank God, not so much in like, well, still in skyscrapers and cubicles, like really disconnected from, So if it replaces some of those things in the short term, I would say that's not the worst thing. There's a real opportunity to unlock, again, when we get to human flourishing and human potential topics, but also those people who are impacted, those are considered like white collar jobs for the most part. And those people are skilled. So, there is a job transition to navigate. You need to do AI literacy and reskilling. You need to kind of mitigate against the unequal effects of AI that it will impact certain industries and job areas and countries more than others. And there's a whole question about the unequal benefits and gains. But I would say in general, those people will be absorbed into these new industries and roles. There'll be hybrid human AI roles that we need, at least in the short term, because we're not at, AGI yet, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I know my answers I'm giving for these things are very long, but I just feel like I have a lot to try to communicate about it.
Totally all right. I honestly appreciate the longer answers. There's a lot more information to dissect there. So I'm also probably gonna watch over this again. Look at the details of it. But yeah, you mentioned that like there's a lot of like new industries that are being created by AI. And I was just wondering what like specific industries maybe or what spaces do you think in the next like 5 years or so AI is gonna like most significantly impact positively?
Well, yes. I mean, this is like whatever I say will just be my opinion or hypothesis. Like, I think even the best, smartest AI investors that we work or collaborate with, there's a humility around this because, again, if you think about the internet, it's really funny. I came across this report from the late 90s, which was hypothesizing about the internet, like how we would use it in the future. And it was like, we will be able to email each other and like we will be able to search for information and all these sorts of things, right? Like use cases that we got right. But if we go back to these examples I gave before, it could not have fathomed social media and like Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok. Like it could not have fathomed e-commerce, like actually buying things online. It could not have fathomed the fact we're on this Zoom call right now together and I can like see you here and we're like that was totally out of the realm of possibility of what we could even imagine. So similarly, we can't imagine. I think it's hard for us to fathom as humans things that are very outside the realm of how we currently operate. But what I would say, I mean, I think like if you talk about specific industries, there's amazing stuff being done in climate and sustainability. And I truly believe AI will be one of our greatest allies in the fight against the climate crisis that we currently face. And I can talk about that. That was also more my realm of study. It's doing incredible things in healthcare, making healthcare accessible to more people at a lower cost and making it more personalized and tailored to the individual experience rather than these kind of broad sweeping diagnosis and get on a treatment plan or a drug or whatever it may be. It's doing amazing things in education. Like I mentioned, we didn't mention the part about education where these platforms are kind of, in theory, AI can help educate the world and democratize knowledge and learning and reach people who, can't spend the time to or can't afford to access education in the way we currently, it's like knowledge at your fingertips. And again, personalize them in their language and the way they like to learn, et cetera. And also it's creating pathways for financial inclusion, which is a whole probably very interesting for your platform as well. But it's like, anyway, I don't want to go too deep into any of those, but there's all those. And then one thing, the one I get the most excited about though, is that right now everyone is building efficiency and productivity tools with AI. They're all building this solution that will make this workflow in this company context, in this industry, faster and better and cheaper. Or some are looking at top line growth solutions, but it's all like efficiency, productivity, et cetera. When ChatGPT 5 came out, I don't know if you heard about this. A lot of people there was sort of like a backlash because there was a shift in the way that the model engaged with people on a more interpersonal level. Like it didn't have the same tone. It kind of flattened the answers to be more, yeah, like standardized. It like kind of lost its personal touch that people had been used to with GPT-4. And so actually there was kind of an outcry about this, and OpenAI rolled back some elements to 4 is at least kind of my understanding of what had happened. But so as a result, people suddenly went, wow, we're all, are we, not everyone, but there's some people now thinking about this. Like, are we underestimating the emotional use cases of AI? And the fact that people feel in a way seen and heard and validated by interacting with this technology on some level. And that's very new. People will poo-poo it a little bit. Sometimes they talk about like sycophantic AI and like, oh, AI is becoming your best friend, replacing I don't, I'm not so quick to dismiss that. I think this is pointing to a real human need. And where there's a need, there's products and there's solutions that you can build for. And I think we're going to see a real rise at the intersection of AI and human flourishing. That intersection, I already can name a lot of cool companies doing cool things in that space, which maybe we can get into. But I would say, I was speaking at the responsible AI conference at San Jose State University the other day, and a ton of students came up to me after who are all studying psychology and AI, or emotional AI, or empathetic AI, or empathy and technology, or digital well-being, all these really cool topics. And for me, it's like, yes, that is where the future lies.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, especially now, we're sort of like in a mental health crisis. There's a lot of like issues with depression and whatnot. I think maybe in the psychology space, AI definitely has some potential. But I wanted to ask you about climate specifically. For some context, I mean, I'm from Washington State. I spend a lot of time in the mountains. I appreciate the glaciers. And I mean, global warming, climate change might make it so that 20, 30 years from now, those glaciers aren't going to be there. I mean, I can already name a few that have disappeared in the past 20, 30 years.
Right. Of
And I was
course.
just wondering, like, what I guess specific developments in AI are addressing climate change, or what room is there for AI to help the climate change issue, or just climate in general?
Yeah. So let me definitely talk about the specifics. One thing I'll address though first, because you didn't mention it, but a lot of people ask this, they're worried about the energy cost of AI itself. The fact that, like, there's a huge energy demand to run these models in the current stage that we're at with the technology, et cetera. So, and that's true, but there's a couple reasons I feel hopeful about that. And then we'll talk specifically about use cases that address kind of climate and things like this. Um, One is that everyone across the AI stack, whether it's like the hardware layer with the data centers, et cetera, whether it's these LLM players and the whole rest of like model ops, DevOps, APIs, and hubs for developers, or the app layer and agentic, et cetera, every company building across that stack has a vested interest in making AI more energy efficient. Because I mean, it's a universal competitive advantage. If they can squeeze more compute out of each watt, that's good for everyone. So that's one thing I feel positive about. It's like no one's lobbying against making this a more efficient technology. The second is, again, historical precedent. So I think your students are way too young to, even I am, but like the early computers took up entire rooms. And if you look up pictures of them, it's like, those were incredibly energy inefficient, and they could do very little. Like that whole computer that taking up that whole room could basically do what a crappy calculator could do now in a second. It would take it like days or whatever. I'm making it up, but I think there's some stat that compute capability has gotten 80 trillion times more efficient since the 70s or whenever. Don't quote me on the exact time frames, but like since the first computers. So we can expect that, we're in like the dinosaur computer days of AI. And so therefore it's less cost effective, and that we always like, there's a lot of people working on this, and that will, people are building sustainable data centers as we speak and all these sorts of things. So that's on the energy side. Oh, and one more thing I'd say about it is just that whenever you mention AI, hand in hand with that, we talk about efficiency. So yes, there's a huge energy demand that's required right now. But if the promise is that AI makes us more efficient at almost everything we do, that also means more energy efficient. As you look at that across, any industry, any use case, any example you want to take. So remember that its greatest promise is actually making us more efficient. And so if the demand is high now, will still come down. I mean, that's just an interesting framing to give. Okay. Now to your real question. Use cases I get excited about. So one is in the marriage of AI with Earth observation, which is basically super powering our satellites and all the data coming from our satellites using AI. And there's really cool things it could do. Like you mentioned glaciers or icebergs. AI and EO together can map icebergs 10,000 times faster than humans can right now. They can spot illegal mining operations happening in like the Amazon or something, even on really tiny scale, right? They can spot that when it's happening. They can spot methane leaks in oil and gas operations. So that's very cool, right? It's like almost like supercharging our ability to see what's happening on a global scale using satellite imagery and data. Another one is digital twins. So this is like the use, basically they're using AI either at like a city level or a national, even a global level, to create digital twin versions of those geographical spaces. You can have a digital twin of a city, and you can map things like traffic or pollution or heat islands or microclimates and weather and things like this and predict many things and plan accordingly. And you could do that on a global scale as well, which they're mostly using for kind of climate and weather patterning. And it's really interesting. And then another is like AI and smart devices and like if you have a Nest in your home, Nest is like a smart um heating. Why am I like losing my words? Like a smart adjusts the temperature in your house.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example, but you now imagine again any of these smart tools on steroids with AI where you can get incredibly granular about your energy use or HVAC or whatever it is. And in simple terms, make buildings or homes or structures much more energy efficient by literally honing it into can look at like how many bodies are in this space. What are they doing? What's their temperature? I mean, it's like I'm not an expert on that exact intersection, but it's pretty cool as well.
That's amazing to hear, honestly. I didn't know there was that much overlap between AI and I guess like maybe not environmental science, but climate change in general. So it's uh
Yeah.
good
It
to see.
gets less press.
Mhm. And another thing I was curious about, you mentioned there's uh opportunity for AI in like financial education space or I guess financial literacy space. I was wondering what you meant by that or what specific developments in AI are related to finance.
Well, yeah. I mean, the ones that I was thinking of there, I guess like not necessarily, well, some are more directly relevant to financial institutions. I mean, so the point I was making is about financial inclusion and pathways to access. So, for example, there's AI solutions that make job opportunities more transparent and accessible to people in all parts of the world. Because now we anyway work more remotely, et cetera. So we'll connect individuals with jobs that may be relevant to their skill set, no matter where, anywhere in the world at any time. And I have a friend who's working on this actually um, for the state of Florida, so like on a government level, and trying to provide access. There's certain jobs that are maybe, how would I say, like there's jobs that maybe need to be done in other parts of the country that wouldn't come onto the plate if someone looking for a job who doesn't have a certain set of skills or whatever. And it's trying to kind of bridge that gap. But then also, one of the examples I think of is, say you're applying for a loan or you're applying for a mortgage or anything like this. There's a whole series. I mean, that's a whole process in and of itself, but there can be a lot of human bias that comes into that process, or just financial inclusion is a kind of its whole own topic, right? And if you think in the future that there's maybe you can use AI or agents to kind of streamline, obviously they'll have your information, but they'll take your face or your voice or your name out of the equation. That could maybe standardize or democratize access to certain things that people wouldn't usually um, have access to. So I think that's a pretty promising prospect. It's not directly relevant to like, what is AI doing to banks, for example, but
Okay. And then I guess on the topic, you mentioned this earlier, but careers, I was wondering what like you recommend for students, maybe high school students, even college students now, what like fields they should study or they should at least be involved in to set themselves up to maybe, I don't know, either work in AI or do something parallel to AI.
yeah, it's tough because your question kind of puts the onus on the student, which, like, in theory, it should be our academic institutions that are setting students up for success and reflecting the world that they're going to step into. I do think, like we mentioned, AI and climate, AI and healthcare, it's impacting every industry. So I think learning about what some of that impact is yourself could be interesting. And then I know within any course you take, there's probably opportunities to do a research project or go dive deep into a topic. And it never hurts to look at the intersection of technology with the space that you're interested in. So they can, if it was me, this is personal, of course, but because of my humanity focus, I do think like a lot of people don't want to touch technology because they're like, well, I'm not technical. That's just not my skill set. And my call to action is like, in the future we're headed into, especially if you think about some of these emotional use cases of AI, the best people to build for those are not technical engineers, highly kind of data driven, analytical. I mean, those people are fabulous in their own right. But the best people to build for those type of solutions are the people who understand them. And that is social scientists, psychologists, or experts in any given area, like caregivers, mothers, creatives, right brainers, um, you name it. Neurodivergent people, students who are building AI solutions for students, or like, if you deeply understand the demographic and the needs and the this kind of human side of the equation, as I said, then you're well placed to build in it. And the good thing about AI, I mean, you hear all about vibe coding and things, but it's lowering the barrier to entry to actually build some of these solutions yourself. So you don't have to go do like a coding course over the summer like people did before, right? It's becoming much more, again, democratized than that. So those are the suggestions I'd have. But again, I'm trying to lean into this as well as like speaking with academic institutions about their strategy and what direction this means that academia takes, and trying to set students up for success.
I see. I guess in the mention of academia, I don't know, what do you think would be a good way to implement this into schools, I guess? Maybe like on the public side, because I know a lot of, like you mentioned before, a lot of private institutions do have classes like oriented towards AI, but like, I don't know, what you think would be good for public schools, especially with like concerns of like cheating or using AI, I guess for fraud.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I put my consulting hat on, like what would I do if I was tasked with helping I guess in this case, public academic institution with their AI strategy? I would say the first step is just understanding current usage and sentiments. Like on the student side, on the teacher side, who is pro, against, why, what are their fears, concerns, what are they optimistic about, how are they using it today, what tools are the students using, which ones do they like, and why, what about teachers? We hear a lot. I read a study and now I'm forgetting where it came from, but I'm gonna like even try to find it while I'm talking. But it surveyed teachers about their sentiments toward the use of AI in education, and only 25% of them felt that AI impact on education would be primarily negative. This is actually from a Pew Research report from this year. And the other 75% said AI tools are essential for student success. So actually, three-quarters of them say it's a good thing. And from the same study, 60% were actively using it in their lessons today, even before the schools had rolled out formal policy. So, I think that the reality is a little bit different from maybe like the 25% or maybe more noisy majority who are really fearful about this. But I would get a really good baseline understanding of how it's being used. And then I would think about, I mean, this point I mentioned, like once you have a baseline understanding, you could go back to vision and strategy. Like, what is the remit of school in the future? What is its purpose? And for me, it's always like equipping the students to be better citizens in the world of tomorrow. And so, how do you do that? And like, I don't know, is this controversial? I guess it's not, but it's like the curriculum we have today is sort of like arbitrarily we decided like, yeah, math, science, English, history, maybe throw in a little art. Like that's what makes you well-rounded. I mean, I don't think math, I love math, like the kind of legit, like getting really in depth in like proofs and all these sorts of things. I used to love it just as like a thought project. We don't use it, let's be honest. Like none of us really use math at all today. Um, and so, and that's just one example, but it's like, I'm not suggesting to replace some of those things. I think it's great to be really well-rounded, but being well-rounded in the future of tomorrow also means including some of these things we've been talking about and including an understanding of them. And also like your whole platform is about financial literacy. That's still a huge gap. Like people feel so confused about how do I invest my money? Where do I put it? Like, what does it even mean to be financially savvy? My school had a course on like opening a bank account and having your first debit card that we did as like a 1 week intensive thing. But I haven't heard of any other schools really doing that. And same with AI literacy. So I would suggest they start from the strategy. Who do we want to be? what does that trickle down to in terms of the kind of building blocks of our curriculum? And then across all of those, there's schools now doing really cool things. Like they'll have just the first 2 hours of the day is like core learning facilitated by AI, and the rest of the day becomes about project-based learning, debate, dynamism, collaboration, hands-on like application of that knowledge. And those students have amongst the top standardized test scores. So they're learning it just as well, if not even better than other academic institutions. So anyway, I don't know if that actually really answered your question, but
That was a pretty good response. And I completely agree. Especially with the idea of like a well-rounded student, sort of. I mean, like I've had this issue, like specifically with financial literacy. In Washington State, like art is a graduation requirement, but like financial literacy or something like AI isn't a graduation requirement, which doesn't really make sense because I feel like obviously there's some controversy behind this, but I feel like you should be able to know how to do your taxes before you know how to make like a clay pot or something,
I
which
agree with you. And you know what's also missing from curriculums, which I feel very passionately about, which is not related to technology at all, is like how it like personal development or growth kind of were like skills to be a good human in terms of behavior and pattern and conditioning, like healthy relationships, learning about what those look like and like healthy communication and conflict management or emotional process, like nervous system regulation. Like you get pissed off about something, like we've forgotten that we are animals first. And most animals, if you heard this example of the cheetah and the gazelle, like there's a gazelle, imagine a gazelle getting chased by a cheetah across the plains in the desert, and the cheetah's gonna like kill it. The gazelle then, like, say it escapes from the danger, it's gonna do a couple things, like shake itself off, take deep belly breaths, and then like continue with its gazelle life and like go eat some grass and like have amazing gazelle friends. It's not like storing the trauma of that situation, like having PTSD, remembering it in dream, like, because animals, we inherently know how to move emotion through our bodies. We have completely lost that. So, we have things happen to us that stick with us for a long time. It's not our fault, but it's because there wasn't like a healthy system of processing and release of that emotion at the time that it happened. And so all these sorts of things, I mean, I think um there's different uh levels. What's the word I'm looking for? There's certain topics that you can't teach like a 3-year-old, but you can certainly, like my cousin's school is really cool. They If a kid's getting really sad or upset or worked up or angry or whatever, or even really happy, they'll often be like, give them a piece of paper with the outline of the human body, and they'll be like, color in where you feel this emotion in your body, and like color, like what shape does it take, or what is it, does it say certain things like, oh, I hate everything, so pissed off, or like whatever. And they're getting these young kids to do it, which is such a healthy way of being able to identify your emotions, understand the biological purpose of them, because they all serve a biological purpose. Anger protects what we value. It protected the tribe in the past. Sadness is helps us connect and bond more deeply with the tribe, which, by the way, being part of the collective was essential for our survival in the past in a way that it isn't now, but like that's where these things come from, and so on and so on. So it's like we shame bad emotions now, but they serve incredibly critical biological functions, and we just need to learn and be. So anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole now, which is not all related to technology, but it's like education system doesn't teach us that, and therefore we kind of like, this crisis of loneliness, depression, anxiety, whatever else you want to mention, like, I think is directly related to the fact that a lot of the way we live is like this and this. Like, I wake up and go on this screen, then I spend my day on this screen, then I like go home to chill on my big screen, like that's kind of dystopian.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there are definitely a lot of gaps in the education system, as you mentioned, like not just AI and financial literacy, like I guess like standard human behavior. I mean, I know a lot of people leave high school with, I mean, like lacking in those topics. But yeah, I guess to transition back to AI. The
Yeah.
question I did have was about like regulation. I was wondering what regulatory risks there might be in the AI space. I know not everyone's strongest supporter of it, especially with some of the older people in Senate and House of Representatives. But yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts on that were.
Um, I think safety and regulation always lags behind innovation. It was true of the internet too, like in the early 2000s, there's huge moral panic about it, and it was all like dark web and spam and sexually explicit content. But that's just the truth, right? And then now it's kind of the backbone of a lot of what we do today. So yeah, there are early use cases of AI that are less than ideal. And we have this like shadow AI problem that, like I said, that because adoption skyrocketed before the oversight has, you have people using it for cheating, plagiarism, just in education, and then a whole host of other things that aren't great outside of that. So I don't think regulation is always a bad thing. I think that like there's a lot of people thinking about AI governance and the ethics of AI and responsible AI usage, and that having more standards and policies around how this technology is used will be a good thing. And kind of regulation and requirements in terms of data privacy, in terms of bias and inference in the models, and being transparent about how models are getting to their answers and therefore what they're recommending or suggesting or inferring as a result. All these sorts of things I think regulation can address, and it won't necessarily be bad. And but was your question more on like, yeah, as this technology scales, it will come under more scrutiny and there will be more regulation. And what's interesting about it is that there's like quite a bit of global cooperation around this. So you actually have entire conferences and summits and people coming to the table across national and country divides. And then also you have the technical builders, but you also have, as I mentioned, like policymakers, um, people in government, social scientists, psychologists, like all kind of coming to the table to try to figure out how to get this right. Because we are like, AI is old. It's been around since it's as old as the internet in terms of the concept. Like the term was coined in the 50s by Alan Turing, and this whole like, can machines think question. But it's new in terms of the inflection point we've reached in the last couple of years because of where we are with advanced computing capabilities. So it's like old, but then we're in this skyrocketing. So I think we need to address some of the regulatory concerns to make it more safe and secure and ethical, and address data privacy concerns and shadow AI usage and make it work for us. That's my thoughts on it. I don't know if that was really your question, but that's my thoughts on regulation.
A great response. And I guess to follow up on that, you mentioned like some of the ethical risks, like biases. I mean, AI does derive, or most AIs, or most LLMs do derive their data from, well, from humans. And I was just wondering, um, how how can that be avoided, or how can those inherent biases be avoided?
Yes. Well, I would say they don't derive their data from humans directly. Actually, the big LLM players that we have today are trained on publicly available data. Um, like if you think of in the context of Google Gemini, it's obviously learning based on data, like, information that's publicly available on Google or whatever, right? So the issue with that is that's only sort of 10% of the data available in the world. The rest of it is private. It's behind firewalls, or it's in corporate silos, or it's otherwise inaccessible for whatever reason it may be. So the issue right now you have with LLMs, because they're trained on publicly available data, that data is like a mass aggregate of many humans at any given time, right? So it's just like standardizing. If it's interacting with a given individual, it's providing responses and inferences that are based on the masses. Now, even when you solve that problem by getting into kind of accessing proprietary data sets and building foundation models based on, private data, let's just start with that. You still have a little bit of that issue because private data sets have their own bias in them. Like I don't want to make it like too much of a gendered point, but I do think the book Invisible Women is really good in talking about how the majority of data and studies and scientific studies and reporting, et cetera, is based on trials on men. So it kind of like women aren't even, I have a personal trainer certification that taught me all about functional weightlifting and strength training. But then I stopped following that advice when I was like, this is all advice for men, actually. It doesn't account for actually what's good for female bodies for the most part. Anyway, so that's just one example, right? So even when you access that 90%, you still have the problem. I think the solution has to be to train foundation models and, future LLMs, or people talk about small language models as well, but on real-time human data, which is the only way to really account for the messy complexity of us humans. And there's a lot of cool companies starting to do that. But otherwise, you do get, yeah, you have this issue of bias and context and fairness and inference that we have right now.
I see. So essentially, just like to clarify, the size of the data set isn't really what affects but the bias, but more where the data is derived from. Is. So because
Wait,
sorry, go ahead.
no, you say ask it again.
Because you mentioned at the start, like 10% of only about 10% of data is used or processed by LLMs.
In
And
the
like
data.
let's say that had access to 100%, that wouldn't necessarily reduce biases, would it? Or
I mean, it does for certain things, for certain things, but it's not the full solution, I don't think. And it will just be interesting to see. Like, yeah, the big LLMs we can all know and name are mostly trained on publicly available data. So this is just, it's like the gold rush, but data is the land. And so ownership of it will be really critical. And when, especially like with an investor hat, a lot of the time people are wanting to invest in solutions that have privilege access to proprietary data sets or building based on them or doing something in this space because that's not typically an area that will be easy for one of the large incumbents to kind of foray into themselves.
I see. And okay, this is like sort of like a what if question, like sort of a reach. But I was wondering, is there like do you think there's a possibility for AI to sort of correct the biases itself, or do you think that would like through machine learning or something, or would that require like human intervention?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. Like and this gets more into kind of not like runaway AI and the alignment problem, but it's sort of like, can we code AI to have and maintain human values or values that are in alignment with what humans value, or will it develop its own set of those at a certain point in time? And if it develop its own ones, will those be, counter to what we value, or will it be almost like above and beyond it or improving of it, So it's kind of like gets a little esoteric. Probably. I'm sure there's a smart team somewhere out there thinking about this. Like I met someone the other day who's building empathetic AI. And I didn't get to drill in under the covers of what they're thinking about. But as I say, like this whole intersection space about the ethics, the values, empathy, how we relate to it, is really interesting.
And I guess like going back to the topic of data, are there any like I guess like privacy concerns people have? Like I don't know, is the data that like ChatGPT, for example, has access to, is that like all publicized or is any of that proprietary? Maybe some of it could have some like privacy concerns regarding it or
Well, yeah. I mean, right now, if you're using ChatGPT, it's pretty much like Google search. So it's private in the sense that unless you were investigated by the FBI or like taken, were in court or something, I mean, all of that can be used in those settings. The same way that if you watch like true crime, they look at people's Google search history and they were like, oh, they were looking for cyanide use. I don't know, and that can be looked at. So it's not really secure right now, but there's a lot of concern around data privacy and ownership. It's not really a new question. Like that's been a concern since the internet, but ensuring that the data is stored safely and securely and that it's protected from unauthorized use and that it can't get, that we protect critical infrastructure so that it's not hacked or that it can't be scraped or leaked at all. And so there are like, again, there's things being done on country level to address this. Like Europe often leads on this type of regulation. Like they like GDPR, but they have the AI Act from last year. Um, Japan has some AI guidelines that they've launched. I think in California, there's the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And then there's individual companies like OpenAI is definitely one of them, and Anthropic, which are announcing their own privacy policies, which is all about trying to be transparent on what can be done with the data, what the data can be used for versus not. So, yeah. And some of the big LLMs are blocking their models from returning verbatim training data. So like if it's learning based on your input, that's going somewhere where it then gets standardized and kind of extrapolated away from the individual so that you can't relate it back directly, if that makes sense.
I see. Okay. And I guess from like the point of view of an investor, in like regards to these data sets, say like I don't know, a startup that you're looking to invest in or be involved in is claims to have like a proprietary data set. How do you verify that exactly? Uh,
Well, I mean, they can't like abjectly lie. I mean, you have to do your due diligence, right? Like if they're like, hey, we are partnered with Roche and we have access to all of their clinical trials data for over the past decades, like in due diligence, you would verify that claim, right? And so the thing is, I didn't really talk about our investor strategy. We don't directly invest in startups for the most part. We don't directly invest in AI companies. Our strategy for everything we do across all of this is, well, our core strategy is that we invest in the VCs who invest in the companies. So we're kind of a fund of funds model, which means we find the best funds, VCs, venture capital firms, who are investing in those technology areas at the early stage and pure play. So their sole focus is that technology. We partner with them. And as a result, say we partner with 10, each of them invests in 30 companies. We have access to 300 AI companies or startups. And then we watch them as they're growing. And when we see a signal that one of them could be a future emerging unicorn and could be really successful, then we'll come directly onto the cap table and in a later round and invest in them directly. But we don't really do it in the early stage. So by the time we get to our direct investments, they've already been heavily due diligence and vetted by, those first rounds and checks that we were doing.
I see. And like, let me know if this question is like too personal, but you mentioned it's like sort of like later rounds. So would those, I guess, investments be more like private credit as opposed from like, I guess, like early stage VC investments, or
Private credit meaning,
essentially giving out a loan, or
well, so our model is also that we have our own investors. So we have LPs, limited partners, investors around the world, multiple hundred of them, who we raise capital from and acts, and we obviously, well, as GPs in the as partners in the firm. I'm trying not to use lingo that maybe the students wouldn't understand. As partners in the firm, we put in our own capital as well. And then all of that gets put into any of our investments, whether it's the VCs in the fund of funds or whether it's a direct investments at the later stage. So so a little bit of both. And then, but are you asking about like how venture typically works in terms of like what the like early stage venture in terms of what they're asking of the companies they invest in? Or
yeah, I guess sure. I wasn't asking that before, but now that you mentioned it, if you want to go into that, that'd be great.
yeah, well, so venture capital firms, so if you think of like investing as this spectrum of, you have very early stage, which is like right from, if a startup is often they call it like a pre-seed or a seed round, which maybe they just raise from their friends and family and a couple additional people, through to like a seed and then a formal A round. Those are all considered very early stage investment rounds. Then you'll have like B and C rounds and later rounds, which is like mid and growth stage rounds. And then often either the company will, well, if it's a successful company, it might exit or IPO, which all then you get into kind of public markets. So you have like private markets, private equity, which is all that first half, and then you have public markets and where things are on the stock market and you can invest in it that way. So we're like super early stage. Well, we're definitely all in the private. It's funny because in private equity, there's private equity and then there's venture capital, but like not all private equity is private equity. Does that make sense? One of those things that's like not all this is that, but all this is that. Does that make sense? Not all private equity is private equity, but all private equity is private equity. This private equity also has venture capital. Okay, I'm going to stop. So the VC firms, basically the simplest way to explain it is they will be talking to a founder and they'll say, we love what you're doing. We believe in your team. We believe you're the best team to execute on this. We love your idea. We see a gap in the market. We want to back you. We want to invest in you. We will give you this amount of money for X% of your company. And that's typically how it works. So it's like, we'll give you $1 million for 5% of your company, or $2 million for 10%, or, it's usually in the range of 5 up to 15, I would say, at early stage.
Generally, it's in exchange for equity, correct?
Sorry?
Generally, it's in exchange for equity in the company, correct? Or that's
Yeah.
the I see. Okay, awesome. Well, I guess before we wrap this up, I do have one final question for you. which we ask everybody, and that's what is one piece of advice that you have for the youth today in regards to your field, or I guess general advice?
My advice is that whether or not you consider yourself technical, AI is going to create so much, to be a social media influencer today, you don't need to know how to code on the internet. And that's kind of an equivalent of what we're talking about here. Like AI is going to create entirely new industries, opportunities, career ladders. And we're not there yet. Like we're still kind of in a little bit of infancy of the stage of growth we're at, but it's coming. So I would say, even though you're like artificial intelligence, I don't know, that sounds way too techy for me. Like I'm not that technical. I didn't identify as a super technical student. Like I played the piano and sang and was really artsy and all this stuff. I think, use ChatGPT to get it to explain it to you in the simplest of terms and in a way you understand, and maybe look at how it's influencing areas that you love and just lean in, because especially if you're on the more humanity side of the equation, there's a real need for those people to be part of this equation as we're in this really pivotal window where we're making sure this technology is built for good, that it's going to be ethical, that it's going to be governed properly, and to build all these emotional use cases that my opinion and hypothesis is that will be really massive going forward. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I'm a technical myself, and I'd love to still have involvement in the space. So, hopefully, everyone watching this episode can take that to heart, and hopefully still look to have some involvement in AI, regardless of their technical ability. But yeah, thank you so much for taking this interview, and to the viewers back home, you can tune into more West Bank Financials episodes on our YouTube channel or on our website. Thank you very much.
Nice. Bye, everyone.